call in the middle of the night telling me that my dad had died in the hospital. I was the last one to arrive there since I was assigned to a parish that was about 90 minutes away. The rest of my family was only about 30 minutes away from the hospital. By the time I got there, my mom and my brothers and sisters were all gathered around my dad's bed. And I walked in and I took my place at the foot of the bed. And I immediately felt lost. I honestly did not know what to do, how to act, or what to say. This was a new feeling for me, and it really perplexed me. As a priest, I had been called many times before, either to a hospital or to someone's home, as someone was near death or perhaps had just recently died. My seminary training had prepared me well as to what to say and what not to say. I knew how to sit with people's grief. I knew how to offer words of hope when appropriate. I had done this countless times before. I even thought myself as being pretty good at this. But now with my own dad, as I sat with my own grief, I was lost, almost as if I were experiencing death for the first time. Eventually, one by one, my mom and my siblings said their goodbyes to my dad, and they left the hospital room to wait outside until it was just my sister and myself. It was at that point that the pain of death just hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt my knees buckle, and I fell down to the ground, and I cried like I'd never cried before. Mixed in with the grief of the moment was also the tears that I had shed before, but in silence, in my prayers to God, in my own Martha and Mary moments when I would cry out, "Lord, if you had been here, my father would never have gotten sick. Lord, if you had been here, my father would not have died." As a priest, of course, I believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. But in that very moment, the pain of suffering and death was so real and extremely overwhelming. And more than that, this time it was personal. In many ways, the whole world is presently overwhelmed by the pain and suffering and death that is a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We too may find ourselves having our own Martha and Mary moments. Lord, if you had been here, none of this would have happened. We likewise may join the crowd in today's gospel and say, could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have done something for us? All these are questions and reactions that Jesus faced in the gospel at the death of Lazarus. Ultimately, these are questions that deal with the problem of evil. How do we reconcile a loving God who allows evil to exist? Jesus never answered this question in today's gospel. And for 2 millennia since, humanity has continued to struggle with finding an answer. But even though Jesus never deals with these questions directly, Jesus himself was perturbed. He too experienced the paradox that we struggle with. He too was overwhelmed with the pain of suffering and death. Even though at this point in the gospel, he knows who he is. He knows what he can do for his friend Lazarus, and more importantly, he knows why he was going to Jerusalem, to face his own suffering and death. The gospel tells us that he wept. It's interesting to notice that nowhere else do we hear him do that. He didn't weep when he raised Jairus' daughter to life. He didn't weep when he encountered the funeral procession for the widow of Nain's son and rose him to life. But he did weep for Lazarus, because this time it was personal. This was his friend. And no amount of knowledge about who he was as the Son of God had prepared him for this very human moment where he experienced the pain of suffering and death. During these uncertain and angst-filled times, it's quite natural for us to say, Lord, if you had been here. As before, Jesus doesn't solve this riddle for us. But what he does do for us at this uncertain time is what he did for Lazarus. First of all, he weeps. not just for those who have been directly affected by the virus, either through illness or death, but he weeps for all of us as he sees the amount of anguish this has caused on our world. Being fully God and fully human, Jesus stands in solidarity with us in the grief that we experience whenever we see the news of how many people have been affected by this disease. Jesus experiences the same grief that we do when we look at all the losses that we've experienced, how our world has changed so quickly from one day to the next. Secondly, Jesus calls for the stone to be removed from our own tombs. These are the tombs that we retreat to whenever we are afraid, whenever we are hurt. This is where we go to out of self-preservation from further pain. We retreat and we roll the stone in place so that no more pain can reach us. Jesus calls us for the stone to be rolled open, and he calls us out of the tomb just as he did for Lazarus. He is the assurance that we need during troubling times, that no matter how painful it might get, tomb living is not the way to go. It may be necessary and even helpful to do this for a short while because we're overwhelmed. But Jesus' invitation to come out of the tomb is Jesus inviting us to move from fear to peace, from death to life. And finally, and more importantly, what Jesus does for us is that he asks for the bands of the burial cloth to be untied and for us to be free. Jesus didn't just resuscitate Lazarus so that he might pick up his life where he left off. Rather, when Jesus gives life, he gives it fully and abundantly, unfettered from all the limitations and conditions that society or even we can place on our lives. That's the significance of those beautiful words, untie him and let him go free. Lazarus was not just raised from the dead, he was raised to new life and free from all the death that compromises life. During these difficult times, my friends, Jesus offers us the same freedom. In our prayer at this time of need, we'd be jeopardizing our own happiness if we only prayed for Jesus to make things better so that we can go back to our former lives. No, Jesus wants so much more for us than that. He also wants us to be free of all the limitations that we place on ourselves and others, which prevent us from fully living life as God intends us to live. My friends, as we struggle with the uncertainties of these times, Jesus is continually calling us out of the tomb into the light of the Lord. That might be a little intangible for us right now, especially since we still have to remain in the tombs that we now call the stay-in-place order. But that's okay. It's a perfect time for us to tune our ears to the voice of the Lord so that we can indeed hear him. Our world has grown really quiet because of this, and it's a great opportunity for us just to be silent, to be still, to be with God so that we might hear God speaking to us. This is also a great opportunity for us to look at our own lives and the lives of our loved ones and even of our world and to see what's holding us back from truly living life as Jesus wants us to live. What's keeping me in the tomb? Where do I find myself tied down from the compromises I've made in life, from the sins that I have chosen? Where are others tied down because of my own actions or inactions or because of relationships that are broken and are in need of healing? What do I need to leave behind in the tomb? I now credit the experience of mourning my father with fundamentally changing my way of being a priest. Since then, my approach with visiting the sick and dying and celebrating funerals has changed completely. All of that is different now because of my father's death. This COVID pandemic can have the same effect on us as well, if we let it. It's an opportunity for grace to change our approach to life, to relationships, and to our faith. Simply returning back to our normal lives would be merely like popping our heads out of the tomb, only to retreat back into them. Or it'd be like leaving the tomb and we walk around like mummies, still tied down by our burial cloth. Jesus calls us to something more. Jesus calls us to life fully lived, unfettered and free. Because again, this time, it's personal, because he is our friend.